Blood on the Bronx Streets, a Bernard Miller Mystery, Part 1. Old Streets, New Blood. It had been years since Bernard Miller had set foot in the South Bronx. The familiar streets, now weathered by time, still bore the weight of his past. He had left the NYPD behind, moved his family to New Jersey, and started Tech One Computers in Pennsylvania to build a better future. But now, he was back. The pull of the Bronx was irresistible, though not by choice. A string of gang-related murders in the South Bronx had the police baffled, and Bernard's old friend, Detective Cynthia Toussaint, had asked for his help. The names of the gangs involved were whispered in hushed tones: Sev Side and Third Side. Rival factions locked in a brutal turf war, their violence bleeding onto the streets. Bodies were piling up, and the latest victim, David Messina, aka BJ from Sev Side, had been executed in broad daylight, sparking fears of all-out war. Bernard arrived at the scene of Messina's murder, where Cynthia and Hector Ramirez were already waiting. The street was cordoned off, yellow tape flickering in the breeze. The air was thick with tension, and the ever-watchful eyes of the neighborhood stared from behind windows and corners, knowing better than to get involved. "Glad you're here," Cynthia said as Bernard approached. "This case, it's escalating fast. The Sev Side and Third Side gangs have been at each other's throats for months, but something about this feels bigger." Hector, his expression grim, added, "We've got multiple homicides linked to these gangs, but no one's talking. Witnesses are too scared to come forward." Bernard scanned the area, his instincts kicking in. He could feel the danger lurking, the quiet before the storm. His mind drifted back to his kids, Tasha and Anthony. He had left them in the care of his in-laws, Catherine and Joe, but his heart was heavy. The murder of his wife Fiona, due to his past, had left scars he still carried. Now this case threatened to pull him back into a world of violence he had tried to leave behind. "Who's leading Sev Side now?" Bernard asked, snapping back to the moment. "Kevin Persada, aka K Flock," Cynthia replied. "He's young, reckless, and deadly. But it's the Third Side leader you need to worry about. Isaiah Ronaldson, aka Zay Munna. Rumor has it he's orchestrating something big." Bernard narrowed his eyes. "And Messina's death? Execution style," Hector said, showing Bernard a photo of the crime scene. This wasn't just a hit, it was a message. A message to who, though? Bernard wondered. And why now? Part 2, Whispers in the Shadows. The next day, Bernard dove deeper into the gang's operations. Cynthia and Hector shared what they had gathered from informants, fragmented intel, half-truths whispered from the shadows. It was clear that both Sev Side and Third Side were tangled in more than just street-level beef. There were whispers of drugs, racketeering, and territory grabs, but nothing concrete. The murders, however, were accelerating, escalating from small-time violence to organized, calculated hits. Bernard's contacts within the old neighborhoods were still active. Through an old friend, he arranged a meeting with Eric Bermson, aka EJ, one of the Sev Side gang members who might have insight into the recent killings. The meeting took place in a small, dimly lit bodega tucked in the back streets of the Bronx. EJ's eyes darted around nervously as he spoke to Bernard. "Word is, Zay Munna's about to make a move," EJ whispered, his voice shaky. "They're planning something big, but no one knows what. Sev Side's scrambling. They got K-Flock on edge." "What about David Messina?" Bernard asked. "Why was he targeted?" EJ hesitated, glancing around before leaning in closer. "BJ knew something he wasn't supposed to. Got in too deep. There's a mole inside Sev Side, leaking info to Third Side. BJ was sniffing around, and they took him out before he could talk." Bernard's mind raced. A mole inside Sev Side? This changed everything. The gangs were playing a dangerous game, and Messina had been a casualty. "What about the others?" Bernard pressed. "The murders? Is this all part of the same plan?" EJ looked down, reluctant. "I don't know, man. All I know is, it's getting hot. Zay Munna's got something up his sleeve. He's pulling strings from the shadows. Everyone's on edge." Before Bernard could push further, EJ stood abruptly. "I've said too much already. You gotta watch your back, Miller. This ain't over." With that, EJ disappeared into the night, leaving Bernard with more questions than answers. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just a gang rivalry. Something more sinister was at play. Part 3, The Pressure Cooker. As the days passed, tensions in the Bronx reached a boiling point. The streets buzzed with rumors of an impending showdown between Sev's side and Third Side, and the violence was creeping closer to home. Bernard could feel the walls closing in. He spent his nights checking in on Tasha and Anthony, watching them sleep peacefully, while the weight of the investigation bore down on him. Cynthia called one evening with chilling news. Sean Sanders, aka Sticky, of Sev's side, had been found dead in his apartment, shot execution style. Another murder in the growing body count. Sticky was close to K Flock, Cynthia said over the phone. If he's gone, Sev's side's leadership is cracking. Bernard rubbed his temples, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. Sticky knew something. He was part of this mole business. Hector chimed in. We've got informants saying there's a power struggle brewing inside Sev's side. Whoever the mole is, they're destabilizing the gang. It's all leading to one final play. Bernard felt the urgency pressing down on him. The mole was the key to everything. The murders, the chaos, the unraveling of Sev's side. But who was pulling the strings? And what did Zaymana have to gain from it all? That night, Bernard made a decision. He would go after K Flock himself. If there was anyone who knew the truth, it was him. But K Flock was notoriously dangerous, and getting close to him wouldn't be easy. The next day, Bernard arranged a covert meeting with K Flock through an old NYPD contact who still had ties to the gangs. The meeting was set for an underground club in the heart of Sevside territory. Bernard knew he was walking into a lion's den, but he had no choice. When he arrived at the club, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The air was thick with the smell of cigarettes and cheap liquor, and the thumping bass of the music made the walls tremble. K Flock sat in the back, flanked by his crew, his eyes cold and calculating. You got guts coming here, Miller, K Flock said, leaning back in his chair. I'm here for answers, Bernard replied, his voice steady. About BJ, Sticky, and the rest, I know there's a mole. K Flock's eyes flickered with recognition. You think I don't know? I've been cleaning house. But it's too late. Zay's already made his move. What move? Bernard demanded, his heart racing. K Flock smirked. He's taking over. Sev's side, Third Side. It won't matter. Zaymana's about to own the whole Bronx. Part 4, the final play. Bernard knew time was running out. Zaymana's plan was already in motion, and K Flock's empire was crumbling from within. The gang war was about to explode, and if Zay succeeded, the Bronx would be his. The final showdown took place in an abandoned warehouse on the Bronx waterfront, where Zaymana and his crew had gathered to finalize their takeover. Bernard, Cynthia, and Hector had tracked them there, ready to put an end to the bloodshed. As they approached, gunfire erupted. Sev's side and Third Side had both arrived, each side determined to wipe out the other. In the chaos, Bernard saw Zaymana orchestrating the violence from behind the scenes. With precision and determination, Bernard and his team pushed through the carnage. Shots rang out, bodies fell, but Bernard's focus never wavered. He locked eyes with Zaymana, and in that moment, he knew this was it. In the end, Zay's plan failed. Bernard cornered him in a back alley, the sound of sirens closing in as the NYPD arrived to clean up the mess. Zaymana, defiant to the last, was taken into custody, his dreams of empire shattered. As the dust settled, Bernard stood alone, watching as the gang leaders were led away in handcuffs. The war was over, but the cost had been high. Back home, Bernard hugged Tasha and Anthony tighter than ever. He knew the streets of the Bronx would never truly be safe, but for now, they were free of the violence that had threatened to consume them. And as long as he had his family, Bernard knew he would keep fighting, no matter how dark the world became. Part 5, After the Storm. The chaotic streets of the Bronx had finally quieted, the distant echoes of sirens fading as the sun began to rise over the South Bronx skyline. Bernard Miller stood on the rooftop of an old tenement building, overlooking the scene below where police lights flashed and the remaining gang members were rounded up. The Sev Side and Third Side war, which had left a trail of bodies and broken families in its wake, was finally over. Isaiah Zaymana Ronaldson, the ruthless leader of the Third Side gang, was in handcuffs. His plan to unite the gangs under his control and take over the Bronx had been dismantled. Zay's arrogance had been his downfall, thinking he could outsmart everyone, including Bernard. But Bernard and his team, Detectives Cynthia Toussaint and Hector Ramirez, had been relentless, navigating the dangerous web of gang violence and betrayal to bring the truth to light. Hector, covered in grime and sweat from the night's action, approached Bernard with a tired smile. "We did it," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "Zaymuna's empire is crumbling. The streets won't be perfect, but at least this war is over." Bernard nodded, his thoughts still heavy. "For now," he replied, looking out at the city that had once been his beat. "There's always someone else waiting to take over. The Bronx has a way of pulling you back in, no matter how far you try to get away." Cynthia joined them, her face etched with exhaustion but also pride. "You're right. This fight isn't over. But we've made a difference here. We stopped Zay before he could do any more damage. That has to count for something." Bernard knew she was right, but there was always a cost to victories like this. The violence, the bloodshed. It weighed on him. He couldn't help but think of his children, Tasha and Anthony, back home in New Jersey. Every time he stepped into the line of fire, he was reminded of Fiona's death, and how easily his family could be pulled into the same danger. He checked his phone, and a small smile broke through the tension on his face when he saw a text from Tasha. "Tasha, everything okay, Dad? Me and Anthony are worried about you." Bernard quickly replied, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Be home soon." Cynthia noticed the shift in his expression. "How are the kids holding up?" "They're good," Bernard replied, pocketing his phone. "It's hard sometimes, but they're strong. Fiona made them strong." Cynthia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "She'd be proud of you, Bernie. You're doing the best you can for them." As the police cars pulled away and the scene began to clear, Bernard realized it was time to head back. The fight for justice had been long, and the scars from this case would linger, but his family was waiting for him. He'd kept his promise to protect them, but there was always the fear that his past would come back to haunt him. For now, though, they were safe, and that was enough. Part 6. A Quiet Return. Later that morning, Bernard pulled into the driveway of his home in Bloomingdale, New Jersey. The suburban calm was a stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind in the Bronx. As he walked up to the house, the front door swung open, and Anthony came barreling out, throwing his arms around his father. "You're back!" Anthony exclaimed, his wide eyes searching Bernard's face. "We were so worried." "I'm fine, little man," Bernard said, ruffling his son's hair. "Just had to take care of something in the city." Tasha appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed but a smile tugging at her lips. "You always say you're fine, Dad, but one of these days, you're going to have to let us help. You can't do everything on your own." Bernard chuckled softly. Tasha at 14 was growing into her mother's strength and wisdom. "I know. I'm working on it." Inside the house, Catherine and Joe Bennett sat in the living room, watching over everything with quiet vigilance. Their presence was a constant source of stability for the kids, and Bernard was grateful. Even Tanisha, the babysitter, was sitting on the couch, clearly relieved to see Bernard back safe. "You made it through another one," Joe said, giving Bernard a firm handshake. "Glad you're okay." Bernard smiled, the tension from the case slowly easing from his shoulders. "Thanks, Joe. I couldn't have done it without you all here." As the day wore on, the weight of the case in the Bronx seemed to dissipate, replaced by the warmth of home. Bernard sat with his kids in the backyard, watching as Anthony kicked a soccer ball around while Tasha lounged with her book. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. But deep down, Bernard knew the peace wouldn't last forever. The streets would call him back as they always did. Another case would come, another challenge, and he would be ready. His family gave him the strength to keep fighting, even when the odds were stacked against him. For now, though, Bernard was content to enjoy the quiet moments. Fiona's memory still lived on in their home, in their children, and in the strength he carried with him every day. No matter what the future held, Bernard Miller was determined to protect the people he loved and bring justice to those who couldn't protect themselves. The end.